Tim told me he was on a board once where an old hand on the board told him, Tim, your job is once every quarter to decide whether we stick with this CEO or we get a new one. So I call that a sort of low engagement board. And when I surveyed boards throughout the world, and you do find they sort of split into two camps. And we ask people how much time they spend, all in, thinking, reading, at board meetings. And to make life simple, there's the 20 days a year board, and there's the 40 days a year board. You tend to find quite a distribution in all regions, but if I would take the averages, the Asians are the most engaged in terms of the amount of time they spend. The Europeans are in the middle, and the US boards spend the least amount of time. But there's a huge distribution within that. So for those of you who've looked at, for instance, the research on the Netflix board, you'll see that the board members there attend executive committee meetings and meetings of management one layer below that and meetings of management one layer below that as observers. So you can imagine their time commitment is considerable. So I think if you decide you're a low engagement board, and you've never called yourself that, but you're in the job of deciding whether or not you've got the appropriate CEO, you're in the job of ensuring the board complies with all its reporting requirements, and you overview strategy, but you don't get much engaged in doing it. When we talk to the 40-day-a-year boards, they're actually doing, all the above, but they're deeply engaged in the strategy setting process, and they're probably also engaged in monitoring culture and assuring it's aligned with purpose and, getting into the bowels of the organization a bit to see how it operates. I think the challenge really lies with the high engagement boards. The low engagement boards aren't going to do much of this, but the challenge lies with the higher engagement boards. And when we talk to them, forget technology for a moment, just about contributing to strategy, which is essentially what Tim has alluded to. If you get overtaken by trends, it's because you've not kept up, your strategy process hasn't kept up with the trend. But when you talk to high engagement boards about contributing with strategy, you'll often find that board members tell you that if they're not from the industry, it takes them about 2 to 3 years to feel competent in contributing to strategy, never mind technology, just strategy. And the reason for that, they tell us, is because even though companies do a great job onboarding them to the company, they actually do a dreadful job at onboarding them in the industry and its dynamics. So they just don't understand the industry dynamics unless they've been in that industry. And I think the same applies for high engagement boards with technology. There is a learning process. If you're going to contribute to strategy and setting direction, and technology is an important part of that, and where isn't it? There's a deliberate learning process that needs to be gone through. I have found that it's easier for tech-oriented companies to educate their board members. And the reason for that is they tend to see the technology more frequently, and they get used to it. They start to understand, even if they've got humanities or legal background, they have to start to understand what AI means, because they see the engineers using it first in the product. And then they start to think about it strategically. So it's a bit easier for them. But I think deliberate education is required. And even though it's tempting, I'm not convinced that a technology committee is the best way forward, because I suspect setting company direction is an activity all directors should be involved with. They might want a committee to inform them and educate them, but ultimately I think they do need to know enough to be able to have a viewpoint if they're that type of engaged board.
What are competitors doing? What's the landscape doing? It's easy for us to say technology is equally critical to every company, but it's not. There are some companies who have thrived without a lot of technology disruption, and they've maintained their financials in SAP or Oracle, and that's fine. And they're a much more direct-oriented, perhaps, manufacturing, selling business. So is this viewed as a key enterprise risk? And if it's not, then how often is it discussed at the board level anyway? And then the question is, how strong is this CIO who's in charge of maintaining SAP, is there really going to be a meaty enough, if this committee is formed, who are they going to talk to? Are they going to talk to the dude who's maintaining SAP? If they have outsourced their cybersecurity, is this committee going to go meet with the outsourced agencies that or groups that are now managing the IT systems? Are they going to go meet with the outsourced, perhaps, security provider? What's their interaction going to be if this committee is formed? And I want to turn to cyber for a moment. There was a lot of questions a few years ago. Should we have a separate cyber committee? And should we bring a cyber expert onto our board for the same kinds of reasons? Now it's, should we bring an AI expert onto our board? And I think you have to be careful about having a narrow expert on your board to fit every role, because are they really, if cyber's only brought up once a quarter, twice a year, what is that board member going to be doing the rest of the time? Do they have the interest to dive into the financial and the legal stuff? Can they help on many of the other discussions? You know, a company does M&A, do we need an investment banker on the board? Company gets into a lot of legal stuff, do we need a lawyer on the board? You know, you kind of say, if we add an expert in every specific narrow topic onto the board, it's going to be a very different kind of board. And it's certainly a discussion to have in the NomGov committee, but I think we have to be careful of a narrow expert when there are outside experts that we bring in often for those other committees. Does this warrant it? And I think you can't do a one size fits all. You shouldn't have a tech committee. You should have a tech committee, because I think it really depends. In financial services, maybe you do need a tech committee because there's so many things going on where technology is critical. And I think cyber has been a great case, you know, to say, okay, how many board members actually understand information security and privacy, right? That one could argue that information security and privacy is important to every company in every industry. And in fact, there's regulation around it, of course, of what we do with our customers' data. So that's kind of the first step into this field, I think, where we've had to dive in deeper in terms of what kind of technology have we put in place to meet those information security requirements or data privacy requirements.